What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back. So today we are continuing in the Eastern Conference looking at our 2025 Stanley Cup playoff previews. So today it's the Washington Capitals and the Montreal Canadiens. So this is going to be an exciting series. As much as for the whole Johnny Gaudreau situation, I would have liked to see Columbus get in. The way Jet Greaves was playing going into the playoffs, it is kind of upsetting, but unfortunately, there's only 8 spots, and Montreal, for the first time in a couple years, is back in the postseason. So, the situation here, Montreal fought their way to get into the playoffs. They played some really solid hockey down the stretch. They earned their ticket to the playoffs this year. No backing into the playoffs in that wild card spot. They earned it. And with the addition of Ivan Demidov last week, things seem even more on the up for the Montreal Canadiens. Meanwhile, for the Washington Capitals, a little bit of an interesting story. You know, the Capitals have kind of coasted their way to the end of the season. I hate to say that because they finished with 50 wins and 109 points. Nobody, including myself, was expecting that from the Caps this season. But down the stretch, they have not been playing their best hockey. And kind of, you got to go back to probably the end of March is where they really were playing well. And pretty much most of the season up to that point, they were playing well. And then, like I said, through April, they just haven't been that inspiring. And it's one of those things, like, you're not going to play your best every night. And obviously, you know, the losses to Columbus, the 7-0 loss, the 4-1 loss, like, those obviously are the glaring, like, red alarms going off. How much do you want to read into that, though? Probably not too much, but it is something to consider here. So we're going to get into it here in today's video. So let's start off with one of the bigger factors here. The goals for, it's no surprise, 280 goals for this season for the Washington Capitals. That's best in the National Hockey League. They scored a ton of goals this season. And this offseason, we have to do a full video on the Capitals and just the way they have built some of these young players and even the older players. The resurgence of Ovechkin. They basically traded peanuts for Dylan Strome. Look what he's done this year. And then you look at some of the guys they developed. Alexei Protas, Connor McMichael, some really solid players on the Caps. Pierre-Luc Dubois, basically banished from Winnipeg, Columbus, LA, and all of a sudden he just magically makes it work in Washington. There's something there. So that will be for another day. But Dylan Strome led the Washington Capitals in points this season. He had 81 points in 81 games, 29 goals, 52 assists, 43 goals for Ovechkin, right toward the top of the National Hockey League there for goals. And another solid campaign from Ovi, who is now 39 years old and still putting up 40-plus goal seasons. That's incredible, right? Nobody was expecting that. And even probably more shocking than Ovechkin scoring 40 goals this season was 24-year-old Alexei Protas putting up 30 goals this season and 66 points. Nobody expected that when Protas came up. He was supposed to be the next, basically Rempe, just a big guy that could kind of skate. No. He turned it to a different level this season. Congratulations to Alexei Protas. That has been an incredible development for the Washington Capitals and a big part of why the Caps are where they are in the NHL standings, right toward the tippy top of the Eastern Conference. Now, let's get further down the lineup. You have some really solid depth, especially on the blue line. I like Carlson, Chychrun, another great story we could talk about this summer. Rasmus Sandin, you know, kind of going further down, Feovari, Roy, Trevor Van Riemsdyk. All those guys have contributed in different ways for this team. They've just had a lot of guys just figuring things out. And as much as they've had a lot of guys that have been kind of misses, like Sonny Milano really hasn't been the best situation, but he's been injured. There's a lot of things that haven't even gone well for the Capitals, yet despite themselves, they still find a way to win. They still have Backstrom, right? Milano out, Oshie, and they're still getting it done. Now, there is some questions about some injuries. I think it's more resting than injuries, but John Carlson, Chychrun, and Logan Thompson were all out resting. I think those are rest. I wouldn't look too much into that, but they are listed here on the injuries on Hockey Reference. That's why I bring it up, but they should be back in game one, well rested, refreshed, ready to go. A couple of other more interesting stories, though. It does appear that, you know, since the game against the Islanders, the first game in April, the April 6th game where Ovi broke the record, Alexei Protas has been out with a foot injury. We are not sure if he's going to be ready for this series. there really hasn't been much updates yet. And like I said, the last update was April 6th from Bailey Johnson of the Washington Post. That's the last update we got on Protas. We're not really sure what's going to happen there. Jacob Chikrin, like I said, he'll be fine. Sonny Milano, at this point, it looks like he is just not going to be in the lineup. He had a significant setback in his recovery back in March, and that was from Sammy Silver of the Hockey News. We're probably not going to see Sonny Milano in the playoffs. Of course, the Long Island kid, would have been nice to see him continue his success this season. Definitely a setback, so we're hoping the best for him, but rough stretch for him there. Now that we've talked about the Caps for 5 minutes, let's take a look at Montreal, because Montreal, I know those fans are excited up there. There's a lot of Habs fans. Whenever I make these videos about playoff previews and Habs, those videos do so well over the years. And I expect that here in today's video. You guys really show up for all these videos. I do appreciate the support. And despite a 39-31-10 record with 88 points, Montreal's in the playoffs, and they earned every bit of that. The Capitals are a foe for a lot of reasons, but what Washington doesn't have is a lot of the kind of turnaround that Montreal had. Montreal did not have a great start to the season, and it really didn't look like they would be a playoff team. And then coming back from that break in February, that's where things just kind of turned for them for the better. And they do have a couple of games that kind of, you're like, ooh, that's not good. 6-1 loss to St. Louis, 4-6 loss to the Flyers, 4-1 loss to Carolina, or a 5-2 loss to Ottawa. Those were some of the more significant losses over the last couple of weeks that might have you a little bit concerned here for the Habs. But other than that, like, this is a team you don't want to play in the postseason. A great matchup I'm looking forward to, Washington's really good power play. We know all the guys, they do the bumper with Wilson, Strome, Ovechkin. Throw any of those guys out there. Protas when he's healthy. I mean, it's incredible how many guys you could throw on that power play. That's a really good power play. Montreal's penalty kill, top 10 in the league, 81%, which league average is 78. So that's really solid. It's going to be an interesting matchup between, like I said, the Capitals power play, Montreal's penalty kill. That might be the difference in this series. As stupid as that may sound, it could be. Looking at Nick Suzuki, of course, leading the way for the Habs this season, 89 points this season. Cole Caulfield with 37 goals leads the team in goals this year. Lane Hutson has been the story of the Washington Capitals, of the Montreal Canadiens this season. At just 20 years old, this kid had 66 points this season. He leads the team with 60 assists. A really nice story for the Montreal Canadiens. And yeah, he only had 6 goals, but 66 points is 66 points. You don't back your way into 66 points by accident. He's a really solid player. Obviously, the Capitals need to watch him as a threat, passing the puck around, making plays, moving the play forward to the Habs, forwards. That's going to be an interesting storyline to watch. Yuri Slafkovsky, listen, he's 20 years old, and a lot of people think he's been having a down year. He still had 50 points this season. So as much as maybe Slafkovsky isn't what you would want him to be right now, he had 18 goals this year. He still had a 50-point season. It's hard to complain, but with Habs fans, the expectations are high, right? And that's fair. He's a first overall pick. That's going to be there. But a pretty solid campaign for him. And then you look at some of the depth here. I really like the Habs' depth. You have guys like Alex Newhook, Kirby Dach, Emil Henneman, Patrick Laine, Christian Dvorak. Some really solid depth. Yoel Marmia, right? Josh Anderson. This team has a lot of guys that can kill penalties, right? That's why their penalty kill has been as good as it's been. Brandon Gallagher, Jake Evans, right? All those guys. They have a really solid depth of this group. As much as you have Suzuki and Caulfield, who are kind of the lightning rod of this team, you have a lot of depth that can come in and score big goals. And that's why the Habs were able to go on those long playoff runs a couple years back, because they have that depth in the lineup. And they've kind of kept most of those guys, even to this point in the season, a couple years later, they still have a lot of those players. The defense is really solid too. I really like Michael Matheson. I think he's pretty underrated. I think Caps fans get annoyed with him a lot of the season because he's kind of slow. But Michael Matheson is a good defenseman alongside some of the younger guys, pretty much like a Lane Hutson. Like, that's the match. That's the offensive mindset with Lane Hutson alongside that defensive kind of stay back stability on the blue line with Matheson. It just works. And then you've got guys like Arbor Jacki. You have guys like Savard, Gooley. It works for this team, and it's not always the prettiest, but they find a way. And that's been the story for the Montreal Canadiens. That's why they earned their ticket to the playoffs. That's why they are where they are. Is they had to earn every single bit of it. And I think for the Habs this season, I would say their biggest kind of maybe a little bit concern is the goaltending. Going up against Logan Thompson, he's a good goaltender. And if he is going to be back for the playoffs, which we expect him to be, Samuel Montembeault is going to have his hands full. This is a very good goaltender that he's going to have to match up against. It's not impossible, but it is going to be difficult. And I think that could be one of the differences in this series. So at the end of the day, I like both of these teams. It's going to be an interesting matchup. We don't really see this series too often. The first thing I thought of, and I'm sure some of you who are older remember this, I remember Jaro Halak. I think it was 2011 or 2012, something like that. You guys will let me know in the comments down below. Yaroslav Halak, when he was with the Montreal Canadiens, playing that series where he dominated against the Washington Capitals. They were down 3-1 in that series. They came all the way back to win that series in 7. Not saying that's what's going to happen in 2025, a decade later, but that was something that made me kind of curious. Like, oh yeah, I do kind of remember that. So, yeah. So that's it. Like I said, Washington is my prediction to win this series in 6 games. I do have some genuine concerns with how they played down the stretch. I know a lot of Capitals fans aren't thrilled with the distraction with Ryan Leonard and maybe causing a little bit more of an issue than maybe they would have liked. But at the end of the day, these guys are happy for each other. Nick Dowd got a big contract the other day. Ovechkin's cracking jokes. They're chugging beers during practice. Like that is the vibe of this Capitals team, because Ovechkin is kind of the leader on that front. And I think even when things aren't going their best in Washington and there's some adversity, I think Ovechkin with his leadership is just able to calm everybody down and just bring everybody back to level. Like, all right, this is all right. We got this. There's enough young guys who can score. They have the energy, the electric speed, but you also have a lot of the older guys with the experience from that 2018 Stanley Cup from the Capitals. That the balance of both kind of reminds me of Dallas a couple years ago, where there's the passing of the torch, but there's still the guys at their maximum. There's still guys at their level where they can play well. And that's where Washington is right now. So as long as Logan Thompson can out-duel Samuel Montembeault, this is going to be a Cap series in 6. But let me know what you guys think down below. I think it's going to be a good series, but ultimately I think the Capitals will prevail. Let me know down below what you think. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.